Watch where you're putting that cart, sweetheart.
The glass hit the marble floor before anyone moved to stop it. It didn't shatter, it bounced, rolled, and left a slow trail of whiskey across the tile that Hallie Morse was already moving toward before the sound had finished echoing. She had her cloth out before the man who dropped it had even looked down. That was the job. You moved fast, and you stayed invisible while you did it. And if you were good at it, people forgot you were in the room at all. She was crouched, pressing the cloth to the floor, when the voice came from above her. Watch where you're putting that cart, sweetheart. She looked up. Cole Merritt, she didn't know his name yet, but she was standing over her with the easy, unconcerned expression of a man who had never once in his life considered whether his words landed somewhere. He was already turning back to the group beside him. They laughed. Not loudly. Just enough? Hallie said nothing. She finished cleaning the floor. She stood. She pushed the cart 2 feet to the left, out of the way of the cluster of people who had never once been inconvenienced by her cart. And she kept moving. The firm's year-end dinner was not her event. She was not a guest. She was the woman in the gray uniform, working the perimeter of the room, making sure the space stayed presentable while the people who belonged here drank and talked and laughed at things that weren't her. She was used to it. That was the honest answer. Not numb to it, just used to it. The way you get used to a draft in a room you can't leave. It was in that same moment, while she was repositioning her cart, that she became aware of the man in the far corner. She didn't know how long he had been watching. He wasn't obvious about it. He wasn't leaning forward or pointing or doing anything that would draw attention to the fact that he had seen what just happened. He was simply standing very still, a glass in one hand he hadn't touched, and his eyes were on the cluster of associates who had laughed, and his jaw had a quality to it that Hallie could only describe later as deliberate. He wasn't angry the way people look when something bothers them. They don't know what to do with it. He was composed in the specific way of someone deciding whether a thing was worth his energy. And in the time it took her to register that he was looking, he had already looked away. She pushed the cart toward the far side of the room, and did not think about him again for another 40 minutes. His name was Grant Aldric. She would learn that later. Right now, he was just the man who had stood in the corner for exactly as long as he intended to, and then stopped. She noticed, without meaning to, that he moved through the room the way water finds the fastest route, not aggressive. Not hurried, just finding the path of least resistance without appearing to look for it. 3 separate people tried to corner him during the 12 minutes he circulated. She could tell because she watched the shape of each conversation. The person would step in close, set up for a pitch. And within 2 exchanges Grant had said something that ended the conversation so cleanly the other person seemed confused about how they had arrived at.
Goodbye, the associate.
Cole passed him near the drinks table. Grant turned slightly away. Not dramatically. Not enough for Cole to notice, but enough that his shoulder was no longer open, and Cole moved past without stopping. Hallie clocked it. She didn't know why. She moved on. The guests thinned out around 10. The catering staff cleared the main hall, and Hallie was reassigned to the conference room adjacent, resetting the table for the morning, wiping down the panels, collecting the glasses that had migrated in from the hall. She was working in what she assumed was an empty building when she turned from the whiteboard and nearly walked into him. She startled. Hard enough that her notebook slid off the edge of the cart. He picked it up in one motion, didn't hesitate, didn't make a thing of it. And then, because it had fallen open, he looked at the page. She waited for him to hand it back. He didn't immediately. He was reading the margin. And she knew exactly what was written there because she had written it 2 hours ago. While waiting for the elevator, a half-formed note about the hedge fund structure someone had left on the whiteboard. The leverage numbers? Questions she had written to herself that she didn't have the answer to yet. The silence was long enough that she felt her face get warm. He closed the notebook. He held it out to her. That read is wrong on the leverage ratio, he said, but the instinct behind it isn't. She took the notebook. By the time she had processed what he had said, he was already at the door. She stood in the empty conference room for a moment after he left, notebook in her hand, not entirely sure what had just happened. 2 nights later? Late enough that the building had gone quiet in the particular way it did after midnight. When the HVAC shifted registers and the hallways stopped feeling like they were waiting for something, Hallie was cleaning the small kitchen on the 14th floor. She was humming. She did this when she thought no one was around. It wasn't a song exactly, just a low, moving sound that her body made when it was tired and unguarded, and the part of her that usually stayed braced had finally stood down for the night, She was wiping. Down the counter, when she heard the door, she turned. Grant Aldric was standing in the doorway in his shirt-sleeves jacket somewhere else, holding nothing. He had come for water. That was apparent. What was also apparent was that he had been standing there for a moment before she turned. She could tell by the way he didn't look surprised to see her, and she was very surprised to see him. "I didn't know anyone was still here," she said, and immediately felt how unnecessary that sentence was.
I
"Heard you from the hallway."
am.
He moved to the cabinet, took a glass, filled it at the sink. "You don't have to stop." "I wasn't." She stopped. "I didn't realize I was doing it loudly." "You weren't doing it loudly." He drank his water. She held her cloth and tried to look like someone who had not just been caught humming alone in a kitchen at midnight. He set the glass in the drying rack, not in the sink, in the rack, which she noticed because most people left it in the sink, and he said, without looking at her, "You weren't bothering anyone." Pause. "I was the only one here." He left. She stared at the door for longer than she meant to. The fourth-floor hallway, 3 nights after that. She was moving her cart toward the supply closet when she heard him behind her, and then he was simply there, not rushing, not calling her name. Just falling into step at a distance that made it clear he had slowed down on purpose. "Where did you read about the head structure?" He said. She turned to look at him. He didn't look like he was making conversation. He looked like he wanted the answer. She told him. A podcast, a few articles, a course she was finishing online. He asked what course. She told him. He asked what year she was in, and the question was so direct that she answered it the same way last semester. Accounting, finishing in the spring. GPA, he said. She blinked. 3.9. He was quiet for a moment. In the particular way she was starting to recognize, not uncomfortable silence, but thinking silence. The kind that meant something was being processed rather than avoided. "You're wasting the night shift on a 14th floor kitchen," he said. She didn't know what to do with that sentence. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It wasn't an insult. It was delivered like an observation about weather, like something that was simply true. And he had decided to say it out loud. He kept walking. She watched him go, still not sure whether she was supposed to feel better or worse than she had 60 seconds ago. She decided she felt better. She didn't examine that decision. It was the supply corridor that changed things. Cole. Merritt had developed the habit of being somewhere Hallie was at hours when the main office had cleared out. He was never overtly threatening. He was a specific kind of person who understood exactly where the line was and made a pleasure of standing just behind it. He was standing too close in the corridor. Asking her something about printer paper, that was a question, but not really a question. And his voice had that particular texture too easy. Too familiar, that meant he thought this was a conversation. He'd already won. Hallie was thinking about the most efficient sentence to end this when she heard her name, not her name, but Merritt.
Oh.
Just that. From down the corridor, neutral as concrete, Cole turned. Grant was standing at the corridor's end near the stairwell door, and he was not looking at Hallie. He was looking at Cole the way a person looks at a problem they've decided to handle. "The Dalton file," Grant said. "My office." Now. Cole's posture changed immediately. A small straightening, a sudden attentiveness. He moved. Grant turned to follow, and as he passed Hallie close enough that she could have touched his sleeve, he slowed, barely, and said in a voice low enough that it carried only to her, "Don't let people stand that close to you in corridors." He didn't wait for her response. He was already at the door. She stood in the corridor for a moment after they were both gone. The cart was beside her. The printer paper was still on the shelf where it had always been. She went home that night, sat on the edge of her bed and tried to explain it to her roommate Jess, who was eating cereal and watching her with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this conversation. "He's strange," Hallie said. "Strange like interesting or strange like HR complaint," Jess said. Hallie thought about it. She thought about the notebook, the kitchen, the corridor. Strange like he notices things. Things other people don't bother to. Jess pointed her spoon. "That's not strange. That's dangerous." Hallie changed the subject. But she lay awake for another hour. And the thought she kept returning to was not about the corridor, or Cole, or the notebook. It was the water glass in the drying rack, the elevator. 2 weeks in, she was already inside with her cart when he stepped in. He pressed his floor. She didn't press hers. She'd already pressed it. They stood on opposite sides of the car as the doors closed and the floors began to pass. After 8 of them, Hallie said, "The leverage ratio. You said my instinct was right, but the read was wrong?" "What was wrong about it?" He looked at her. Not surprised, more like he was recalibrating, adjusting for something he had expected to happen eventually, he told her. Specifically, technically, without softening it into something easier than it was. She followed it. She asked a follow-up question that came from actually following it, and he answered that too. And by the 22nd floor they had said more to each other than in every one. Prior conversation combined, the elevator opened. Neither of them moved immediately. Then he stepped out. And without turning around, he held the door open with one hand. Not dramatically. Just held it long enough for her cart to clear the threshold. He didn't look back. She did. That night, past midnight. She had finished the floors and was restocking the supply cart on the 14th when she heard it from down the hall. Not music, not voices. Just the sound of his office lights still on. It's the faint sound of movement. She didn't go toward it. She stood in the hall, supply cart beside her, and she thought about the elevator, about him holding the door, about the leverage ratio explanation that he had given her, like she was someone worth giving it to. She went home. She took out her notebook on the train, and she wrote down the rest of the question she'd been thinking about. For 2 weeks, the one that had been half-formed. When he'd first picked the notebook up, she wrote the answer out too. This time, she was pretty sure she had it right. She left the notebook on the corner of his desk the next morning on her way out. She told herself it was nothing. She left the notebook on the corner of his desk and did not think about it. That was the lie she told herself on the train home. In the gray early morning when the car was half empty and the city was still deciding whether to wake up, she sat with her bag on her lap and her hands folded over it, and she did not think about the notebook. She thought about the notebook the entire ride home. 3 weeks passed in the shape of a system neither of them had agreed to. She would find things in his office when she cleaned it, not left for her. Not obviously. Papers he had been reviewing, sometimes with a margin note in his handwriting that continued a thought from something she had written. A question answered with another question. A correction that was also an invitation. She would take the relevant page from her notebook and leave it on the corner of his desk. And the next time she came in, it would be gone, and there would be something new in the margin of whatever he'd been working on. They did not discuss this. They spoke when they passed each other in the hallways, brief and specific. And neither of them named what was happening on his desk every other night. It was the most honest conversation Hallie had ever had with anyone about finance. She was aware that this was a strange thing to be true. She was aware of several things by now that she filed under strange, and did not examine further. Patricia Aldric arrived on a Tuesday. The way people who belong somewhere arrive without announcing herself to the front desk, without waiting in the lobby. She walked through the 14th floor like she had designed it, which Hallie would learn later. She had partially funded. Hallie was in the hallway with her cart when Patricia stopped in front of her. "You're the one," Patricia said. Hallie looked at her. "I'm sorry?" Grant mentioned. Patricia paused, recalibrated. "He didn't mention you exactly. He mentioned that someone on the cleaning staff had a better read on the Harlow Fund structure than 2 of his junior analysts. I've been trying to figure out who that was." Hallie did not know what to do with any part of that sentence. She said, "He said that to you?" "He said it like a complaint," Patricia said. "That's how he compliments people." She introduced herself then. And she had the particular warmth of someone who had grown up in the same house as a closed-off person and learned to take up enough space for 2. Within 5 minutes, she had gotten Hallie's name, her degree program, her graduation timeline, and the fact that she took the 6 train home and always missed it by 30 seconds because the elevator on the 14th floor ran slow. "I'll have someone look at the elevator," Patricia said, very seriously. "Please don't do that on my account," Hallie said. "Oh, too late. I'm already annoyed about it." Patricia tilted her head. "Come talk to me for a minute." "I won't keep you long." She said it like a question. It wasn't really a question. They ended up standing near the window at the end of the hall for 15 minutes, which became 25. Patricia was easy to talk to in the way of people who are genuinely curious and don't perform it. She asked about Hallie's coursework without the faint condescension Hallie had learned to expect from people in this building. And she listened to the answers like they were interesting, because apparently she found them interesting. At some point the conversation turned, and Patricia said, "He was completely insufferable at 17. I say this with full love. He tried to impress a girl in our neighborhood by fixing her car himself, which Grant does not fix cars. Grant has never fixed a car. Grant once described a socket wrench as the small one. He got his hand stuck in the engine for 2 hours. The girl's father had to come out with actual tools." Hallie laughed. Not the polite laugh she kept ready for professional spaces, the real one. The one that came up without permission and tipped her head back and lasted a second longer than she meant it to. It was exactly at that moment that Grant appeared. At the far end of the hallway, he had come from the stairwell. He stopped when he saw them. Patricia was still smiling at her own story, so she didn't catch the moment, but Hallie, even mid-laugh, saw his face. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something they weren't prepared to see. Not surprised, exactly. More like recalculating. Like something he had filed under one category had just refused to stay there. Hallie straightened, pressed her lips together, tried to look like someone who had not just been caught laughing with his sister about him. Grant looked at Patricia. "You're telling the car story." "I tell everyone the car story," Patricia said, completely unbothered. "You tell it to people you like," he said. "Yes," Patricia said, and looked at Hallie with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who has just made a point without making it. Grant looked at Hallie for one more second. Then he went into his office and closed the door. Cole Merritt found her in the lobby. 3 days later, he had been sidelined for weeks. She'd noticed without looking for it. The way you notice when something that used to brush up against you is no longer in the room. She had assumed it was coincidence. It was not coincidence. But she didn't know that yet. He was waiting near the elevator bank when she came down with her cart at the end of her shift. The lobby was mostly empty. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had decided he had nothing left to lose. "You know what's funny," he said, "is watching someone think they've moved up because a man with money started paying attention to them." Hallie pressed the button for the elevator. "He keeps you around like a project," Cole said. "You know that, right? You're interesting to him the same way a stray dog is interesting." For about a week, the elevator opened. Hallie stepped in, then turned. "The janitorial staff keeps this building running," she said, and her voice was level, not performing calm, but actually calm. The specific calm of someone who is tired of the species of person currently in front of them. "You've worked here for years, and you still ask where the printer paper is? So I'm not especially worried about your read on who's interesting to who." She pressed her floor. The doors closed. She rode up alone, and her heart was going faster than her face had let on. And she stood very still and breathed until it slowed. Grant came through the lobby doors. 6 minutes after that exchange ended, he saw Cole's face first, the set jaw. The too-still posture of a man who had just been embarrassed and was deciding how to carry it. He saw the direction Cole was facing. He read the lobby in under 3 seconds. "Merritt," he said. Cole turned. "It wasn't anything. Clean out your desk," Grant said. "HR will process the paperwork this afternoon." Cole opened his mouth. Grant looked at him with the particular quality of someone who has already moved past this moment in his mind and is simply waiting for the physical world to catch up. Cole left. Grant stood in the lobby for a moment. Then he went upstairs. She was sitting on the front steps of the building at 11:15 that night, eating a vending machine sandwich. Because the break room microwave had made a sound earlier in the week that she had described to no one, a grinding. The unhappy sound that suggested it was 1 use away from retirement, and she had been eating cold food for 4 days. She heard the door open behind her. She assumed it was the security guard doing his round. It was Grant. He was in his coat, which meant he had been leaving. He was not leaving now. He looked at the sandwich in her hand, then at her. Then he sat down beside her on the steps. Not next to her, like he was making a point. Just next to her. Close enough that she could see the cold bothering him, the way it bothers people who are not dressed for sitting outside. And he did not say anything about it. "The microwave," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know about the microwave?" "The security log flags maintenance requests." "You didn't file one?" "I didn't want to bother anyone." He said nothing for a moment. The street in front of them was quiet in the specific way of late-night cities. Not empty, just rearranged. Different people moving at different speeds, with different reasons. "I lost everything once," he said. She waited. "Business." "The person I thought I was building something with, professionally and otherwise." Same year, he was looking at the street, not at her. "I had a partner who had been with me since the beginning. Turned out he had been quietly moving assets for 2 years. By the time I knew, there wasn't much left." They paused. "She left 3 months after that." "I don't blame her, exactly. There wasn't much left of me either." Hallie held her sandwich. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She could tell that wasn't what was being asked for. After that, I got very good at reading rooms, he said. And very bad at being in them, she said. And then I showed up with a notebook. He looked at her then. You showed up, he said. Like someone who actually lives in the world and doesn't just manage it from a distance. Pause. Something in his voice had changed register, quieter, more careful. I hadn't seen that in a long time. I didn't know what to do with it. Hallie looked at her hands. She thought about the elevator, the corridor, the water glass and the drying rack. All the small specific things she had filed under strange and refused to examine. You could have just talked to me, she said. I know, he said. I'm telling you now. He went inside and came back with food from the kitchen cabinet he kept stocked for late nights. 2 things. Nothing elaborate, handed to her without ceremony. He sat back down. She ate. He sat in the cold in his coat that was not built for sitting outside. And he did not mention it. She told him about her mother. The hospital bills that arrived on the 1st of every month in envelopes. She had stopped opening before she had the money to open them. The way she had structured her whole life around the night shift, specifically because it paid 40 cents more per hour than days. And how 40 cents per hour across a full week was not nothing when nothing was what you were working with. He listened. He did not offer to fix it. He did not calculate it out loud. He simply listened. The way someone listens when they understand that fixing is not the point. And that the point is that she had been carrying it alone for long enough that saying it out loud was its own kind of release. At some point she realized she was leaning slightly toward him. She didn't correct it. Inside. Later. He walked her to the elevator. She knew he didn't need to. His car was in the garage off the lobby. He went the other direction. She had watched him leave enough nights to know his route. He walked with her anyway, hands in his coat pockets, not filling the silence, just present in it. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped in. She turned. He was standing in the hallway, not following, not stepping back. Just there. In the particular way, he was always just there, in the spaces she was in. Without making a production of it, she said, You told me earlier that you didn't know what you would have said. After extending the contract, do you know now? Something moved across his face. Not surprise. He had known this question was coming. Maybe he had been waiting for it. He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed behind him. I would have said I want you to stay, he said. Not for the building. Not because of the work or the notebook or any of that. He looked at her directly. Because I come into this building at 6 in the morning, and the first thing I do, before the markets open, and before I look at a single report, is check whether the notebook is on the corner of my desk. She looked up at him. You're the only person I've sat on the front steps with in 15 years, he said. I don't sit on steps.
I know, she said.
You were very uncomfortable. He laughed. It came out short and real and slightly surprised. The laugh of someone who had not been caught off guard in a long time and found it was not as bad as he remembered. Then he raised one hand and tucked a strand of hair back from her face. His hand stayed at her jaw. Warm, certain, the gesture of a man who had made a decision and was no longer arguing with himself about it. She covered his hand with hers. I'll be less uncomfortable, he said. With practice. She looked at him, not at the firm. Not at the reputation she had assembled piece by piece over months of watching him work. Just at him on the front steps, in a coat not built for cold. Who had come back with food without being asked and sat beside her while she talked about envelopes she couldn't open. She said, I think you've been practicing for a while. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. His thumb moved once slowly along her jaw, and she felt it land somewhere deep and specific and entirely unlike anything she had. Filed under strange, the elevator opened. Neither of them moved. He reached back and pressed the button to hold it, and the doors stayed open. The building hummed quietly around them. Hallie Morse had spent 2 years making herself small in rooms, full of people who looked through her. She had gotten very good at it. She had started to think it was just who she was, the girl at the perimeter, the one with the cart, the one who hummed when she thought no one could hear. But he had heard. From the very beginning, through every version of invisible she had tried to be. He had heard. The doors stayed open. She stayed.